Chapter 1, From My Heart. As I write this memoir, I'm 78 years old. Looking back on my life, one of my greatest disappointments is realizing how much I wish I had known in my 20s what I understand now. I was raised by two wonderful human beings who, like all of us, were broken in their own ways. After all, none of us are born with packing instructions. Like my parents, I have made many mistakes. It's my hope that I have learned from them, changed, and grown into a better human being. Today, I can humbly say that I like myself more than I ever have. Over the years, I have come to understand both my existence and my purpose in life. For me, this understanding is rooted in my Christian faith, though I believe many others reach similar conclusions without the framework of organized religion. I call it my circle of life. At the center of this circle is love. I have learned that love, not strength, wealth, or good looks, is the most powerful force in the universe. I have chosen to follow the life and teachings of Jesus because I believe he offers a beautiful example of how we are meant to live. He said to his disciples, "Love one another as I have loved you." But how do we love someone who is evil? The answer, I believe, is forgiveness. And though forgiveness is easier said than done, it is a lifelong journey. We never fully arrive, but if life is a journey, and I believe it is, then I must work at forgiving others every day. My hope is that the longer I live, the more forgiving I become. There is help along the way. At creation, I believe God established a natural order. One of these laws is the principle of karma. We reap what we sow. It's not just a spiritual truth, but a physical one as well. Plant an apple seed, and you won't get pears. I don't see God as a being of retribution, but as one of mercy and transformation. When I plant bad seeds, God is not punishing me. He is simply established the law of consequences. What I experience is neither reward nor punishment, but the natural result of what I have sown. As I live by this principle, I realize even more. Practicing love and forgiveness humbles me. When I judge or condemn others for their wrongs, I find myself judged and condemned in return. Practicing humility reveals the truth. Compared to the holiness of God, there's not much difference between any of us. A country preacher once said to me, "At a time when I was more arrogant than humble, Ed, there's not a nickel's worth of difference between the best of us and the worst of us. We're all cut from the same cookie dough." The final part of my circle of life as a Christian is summed up in Jesus' call. If anyone would be my disciple, they must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. My heart is heavy because so many of us who call ourselves Christians don't live this out. I have not arrived, but I press on toward that goal. Denying myself has taught me that true purpose and joy are not found in me, but in we. Through the 12 steps of recovery, I learned about character defects. We all have them. The difference is whether or not we are willing to acknowledge them. As a recovering alcoholic, I understand my nature. I am selfish. Becoming a better person means working daily to crucify my defects. Finally, my faith has evolved toward Jesus' simple invitation. Follow me. He didn't say follow the Bible. He said follow me. Too often we have used the Bible to justify atrocities, slavery, violence, even murder. But Jesus is our model. If we all lived within this circle of life, centered on love, forgiveness, humility, and self-denial, I believe we would see peace on earth and goodwill toward men. And you don't have to be a Christian to live that way. Chapter 2. The early years of my life. My earliest memories drift back to the east side of Detroit, Michigan, a world that felt so much bigger back then. I grew up alongside my sister Sally, who was 4 years older than me, and my younger brother, born 7 years later. Dad worked his hands and heart as a wood model maker for Chrysler Corporation. Mom waitressed at the Bayview Yacht Club. her smile serving just as much comfort as the meals she carried. Even as a boy, I understood that life had not been easy for my father. His parents had sailed from Brussels, Belgium, to seek a better life in Detroit, though they spoke little English. Dad lost his father when he was just 10 years old. His mother, then pregnant with their fifth son, took work as a domestic for a wealthy family. It was the height of the Great Depression, and the boys largely had to fend for themselves. Hardship shaped my father. He grew up tough, smart, and unwilling to be beaten down. When I was 7, life took an unexpected turn. Dad was sent to jail for 6 months for selling cars without a dealer's license. Without him, everything in our little house. The strain overwhelmed Mom, and eventually she suffered a nervous breakdown. Family and friends stepped in where they could, but much of the day-to-day care for me fell to Sally. Through those rough years, Sally and I formed a bond that nothing could shake. She became my protector. I remember going to Mom one rainy day and showing her the worn-out soles of my shoes. She lovingly cut pieces of cardboard to slip inside them. Her heart was in it, but it did little to keep the rainwater out. When Dad came home, it was as though he was determined to make things right. He poured himself into our lives with a kind of fierce tenderness. At his encouragement, I joined the Cub Scouts and then the Boy Scouts, where he eventually became Scoutmaster of our Troop 491. Those campouts with him are some of my most treasured memories. One stands out. Dad brought a shotgun and a case of clay pigeons to teach the troop about gun safety. I was eager, so eager I could hardly sit still, but Dad made it clear I would wait my turn like everyone else. By the time it was finally my turn, the clay pigeons were gone. Seeing the disappointment on my face, Dad handed me the gun with a twinkle in his eye. He pulled off his beautiful red leather cap and hurled it into the field. Go ahead, Eddie. Take your shot. I aimed, fired, and blew his favorite hat to pieces. The troop erupted in laughter, and Dad just smiled, that familiar warmth in his eyes, proud of me even though I'd destroyed something he loved. On another campout after the shooting lesson, Dad asked me to put the shotgun and shells back in the car. On the way, I spotted a squirrel high up in a tree. Without thinking, I loaded, took aim, and fired. The squirrel fell with a thud to the ground. Dad heard the shot and came over, surveying the scene. He looked at me and said gently, "Eddie, let's talk a little more about gun safety, okay? We never point a gun at anything unless we intend to kill it. And we don't kill anything unless we intend to eat it." That night, I cooked that squirrel over the campfire and ate it. I never forgot that lesson. And to this day, I've never pointed a gun at anything without being prepared to live with the consequence. On my 14th birthday, we were sitting at the kitchen table when Dad said, "Let's go for a ride, Eddie." I jumped into the car, certain there was a special surprise waiting for me. As we drove down the Ross Road, Dad told me about his first job as a caddy at the Country Club of Detroit. Before I knew it, we were pulling into the club's driveway. "I doubt he's here," Dad said, speaking of his old caddy master, "but let's check." We walked past the basketball court where young caddies played between assignments and into the caddy house. Boys about my age were sitting on benches waiting. Dad called out, "Caesar?" A man answered, "Yes, who's asking?" My name's Leo," Dad said. "I used to caddy here years ago." Recognition lit up Caesar's face. Then he asked, "And who's this?" Dad clapped a hand on my shoulder. "This is Eddie, my son. He wants a job." I stood there wide-eyed, thinking, I do? And I've been working ever since. Chapter 3. My home and neighborhood growing up. I grew up in a middle-class working family on the east side of Detroit. Like most kids back then, I walked to school every day, no matter the weather. There were no school buses as far as I knew, and the idea of a parental tax service hadn't yet been dreamed up. Life was simpler, harder, and in many ways more connected. I went to Will Carleton Elementary, Columbus Junior High, and Edwin Denby High School. All my best friends lived nearby, just a few doors down or across the street. My sister Sally, 4 years older, was one of them. She wasn't just my sibling. For much of my childhood, she was my shield. 3 friends in particular have stayed with me through the years. Dickie Schultz, who lives 6 houses down, Dave Bullis, my next-door neighbor, and Ray Brittany, a few houses over across the street. We were all about the same age, living similar lives shaped by the same working-class struggles. But not every face in the neighborhood was friendly. Some kids picked on me, mocking my hand-me-down clothes and laughing when they heard my father was in jail. It stung in a way that leaves a lasting scar. That is, until Sally would step in, fierce and fearless, chasing off the bullies and standing in the gap where I couldn't. We were raised Roman Catholic, and for a time, church was a part of our weekly rhythm. Every Sunday, we filed into Our Lady Queen of Peace, heads bowed and hearts trying to belong. That all changed the day Sally came home from catechism crying. A nun had told her she was an illegitimate child because Mom and Dad hadn't been married in the church. My parents acted swiftly. We left Our Lady Queen of Peace behind and found a new spiritual home at Emmanuel Evangelical United Brethren Church, just a block from where we lived. Those were busy, full years. I threw myself into Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. Mom helped out during my Cub Scout days, and Dad later stepped up to become Scoutmaster of Troop 491, which met weekly in the gym at Will Carleton Elementary. It was during those Boy Scout years that I first made a personal commitment to my Christian faith. I was working on my God and Country Award, spending Saturdays cutting the grass at our little EUB church. One afternoon, after I finished mowing, Pastor Mike invited me into his office. There he shared the gospel with me and asked if I wanted to be saved. I said the sinner's prayer with him and believed in that moment that I truly was. A few years later, Pastor Mike invited me to join YES, the Youth Evangelist Service. It was a thrilling time. We traveled to different EUB churches across Michigan, helping set up youth programs, learning what service to others meant, not just in theory, but in practice. For the first time, I felt a real sense of purpose until the day that innocence shattered. During one of our trips, Dr. Ralph, the head of the YES program, asked me to visit him at his hotel. I was 15 years old. What happened there changed my life. Dr. Ralph, the man who was supposed to be a leader, a role model, tried to sexually molest me. I didn't let it happen. I refused to take my clothes off. I left. When I returned home, I told my parents everything. They immediately called Pastor Mike, who reported the incident to church leadership. A few weeks later, Pastor Mike informed us that Dr. Ralph was no longer in charge of YES. For a moment, I felt safe again, until we learned the truth. Dr. Ralph hadn't been fired. He had been quietly promoted to another position, far away from children. The institution that had promised to protect me had chosen instead to protect itself. My religious days were over. At Denby High School, I joined the philosophy club, where I found a different kind of mentor. Mr. Paul Lux, an atheist, led the club and introduced me to new ways of seeing the world, ways that didn't require me to blindly trust or to silence my questions. For the first time, I realized that faith and doubt, belief and skepticism could live side by side, and that sometimes walking away is the first step toward truly finding yourself. Chapter 4, My Incredible Parents. I have many fond memories of both my parents growing up. So much of the good I carry with me today is rooted in what they showed me and taught me by example. One of the most impressive things about my parents, especially my mother, was how she viewed her role in life. I believe that today, people who value equality would applaud the way she lived. Mom worked hard, right alongside my dad. I remember vividly the time she helped him expand our attic into a bedroom because she was pregnant with Jimmy. I can still see her in my mind, pregnant, straddling a high lift, helping Dad attach tiles to the ceiling. To Mom, gender roles didn't mean much. She taught me how to cook, clean, iron, and help others, skills that had nothing to do with being a boy or a girl, and everything to do with being a good human being. She worked tirelessly both inside and outside of our home, contributing not just to the bills, but also to the little extras, the fun things we wouldn't have had without her income. Dad, on the other hand, was a classic man of his generation. Growing up streetwise, he wasn't always the most honest person I knew. Looking back on my childhood, I have to admit he taught me a few bad things along with the many good. One night, I witnessed something that would shape my view of the world forever. I saw my parents arguing. Then I watched my father grab my mother by the hair and pull her from their bedroom. Even now, the memory is vivid. That moment cemented in me a deep, unwavering intolerance for domestic violence. Even something so wrong, so painful to witness, was eventually transformed into a guiding principle in my life. This is not how it should look. I also learned other, less heavy lessons, like how to save money shopping. Although I don't think he intended for me to see it, I sometimes watch Dad quietly switch price tags on items to pay less. But before you think too harshly of him, let me be clear. Dad was not a terrible father. In fact, he was a wonderful father, in spite of his brokenness. He gave me the priceless gift of a strong work ethic. I believe he also passed on to me his sense of humor, which has carried me through more tough days than I can count. I remember one day he was teaching me about power tools in his wood shop. He said, "Eddie, the most dangerous tool in a shop is the table saw. Whenever you cut small pieces of wood, always use a push stick." One afternoon, working alone, I was cutting a small piece of wood. I remembered his warning, but when I couldn't find a push stick nearby, I thought I'd just be careful. As I fed the piece through the saw, it got stuck and kicked back. My finger slid dangerously close to the spinning blade. Blood went everywhere. I grabbed a paper towel, wrapped my hand, and rushed toward the bathroom. Dad saw me and calmly asked, "Are you okay? What happened?" I admitted I hadn't followed his instructions and cut myself on the saw. He moved the towel, looked at the cut, thankfully not too deep, and said with a grin, "If you're going to be stupid, you better be tough." That was Dad. Straightforward, a little rough around the edges, but always teaching, always loving in his own way. As Mom and Dad grew older, I would visit them often. They had been married well over 50 years. By then, words between them became fewer. They didn't need them. They would often just sit quietly together, smiling softly at one another, comfortable in the kind of silence only a lifetime of love can create. I remember watching them one day as they sat, saying nothing. Then Dad quietly asked, "Marion, would you like a glass of water?" Mom said, "Thanks, Leo. The two shall become one." Chapter 5. Who Wants to Have Fun? As a young child, I think I was pretty typical for my age. I loved being outdoors and enjoyed all 4 seasons to their fullest. In the winter, we built snowmen and made angels in the fresh snow. On weekends, Mom and Dad would take us to the park to go tobogganing. I can still feel the exhilaration of flying down the hill and the ache in my legs after climbing back up again and again. It was a perfect way to stay active without even realizing it. Fall was camping season. We'd pack up and head into the woods, where Dad always took on the role of camp cook. Mom seemed to relish the break, joining us in our hikes and adventures among the trees. Those were some of my favorite times, filled with crisp air, smoky campfires, and the kind of freedom only a child can know. Summers were pure joy. Mom and Dad owned a 24-foot Owens cabin cruiser, and we'd take it out onto the Detroit River or Lake St. Clair to swim and fish. Dad's way of fishing was particularly sophisticated. He called it trolling. He'd steer the boat slowly while two lines trailed off the stern. There were no fishing rods involved, just spring-loaded reels set inside wooden boxes that would reel the line back in when tugged. We mostly caught northern pike and walleye, and Dad always made it feel like an adventure. Sometimes during the summer, we'd head up north to Gaylord, Michigan, camping at Otsego State Park. I remember how peaceful it was, far away from the city, with nothing but the sounds of the lake and the whisper of the trees. Springtime brought chores, repairs around the house, prepping the gardens, working on the lawn. Mom and Dad loved their home, and they took pride in the way it looked. All three of us kids pitched in, helping plant, weed, and mow all the way into fall. As I got older, my interests expanded. Dad bought a used pool table from a bar and set it up in our basement. He taught me how to play 8-ball first. By the time I got my driver's license, I was spending afternoons at the local pool hall on Kelly Road, where I learned how to play snooker. I got pretty good at it and started gambling to make a little extra money. At the time, the movie The Hustler had just come out, starring Paul Newman and Jackie Gleason. Newman's character was a pool shark named Fast Eddie. Naturally, that nickname found its way to me too, Fast Eddie. Looking back, I can only smile and shake my head at the arrogance of my youth. As my love for the game grew, I moved on to more advanced games like three-cushion carom, a form of billiards that demanded even more precision and focus. In high school, I was a little above average academically and about the same athletically. I played tennis and was also a diver on Denby High School's swim team. I earned my varsity letters in both sports and wore my letter jacket proudly, the big D stitched across my chest. But one day at Denby High marked a turning point in my life. It was November 22, 1963. I was walking down the hall when a boy I knew, someone who will remain nameless, came up to me and said, "Hey, Ed, did you hear the N lover is dead?" I didn't even know what he meant at first. I had never heard that term before. Then he told me President John F. Kennedy had been shot. I was stunned by the news, but even more stunned by the hate in the boy's words. I admired JFK. I admired how he lived out his political ideals and the hope he represented. I realized in that moment how naive I had been about racism. I grew up in an all-white community, and out of my entire graduating class, only 4 students were black, and I didn't even know their names. That moment planted something deep inside me, a calling, a quiet but insistent pull towards standing with those who suffered injustice and didn't have a voice. Chapter 6. Oh my God, was that funny? When I look back on my childhood, there was definitely a phase when I was on a mission, get attention, at all costs. I was just a regular kid, nothing unusual about me, but somewhere deep inside, I felt this itch to be noticed, to be extraordinary, and I found my ticket to fame in a dandelion patch. Every summer, our front yard would sprout a few dandelions here and there. Mom and Dad were serious about keeping the lawn perfect, so as soon as they saw a weed, they'd pluck it out. But if I was quick enough, I'd catch a few survivors, and that's when the magic could happen. Here was my grand plan. I'd put on my shorts, crouch down low, and wait patiently for a bee to land on a dandelion. As soon as it did, I'd leap into action, shouting, "Look at me!" and slam my knees onto the flower, squashing the bee beneath me. Mom told me time and time again to knock it off. But did I listen? Of course not. I was getting stung, sure, but I was also getting attention. It was a price I was willing to pay. That is, until the day it all went sideways. After one particularly heroic bee attack, I started feeling dizzy and sick. Turns out too many bee stings weren't just painful, they were dangerous. Mom, 28, rushed me to the hospital because I was having an allergic reaction. So ended my short but thrilling career as a backyard stunt. Why was I so desperate for attention? Maybe it had something to do with Jimmy's arrival. My little brother had just been born, and suddenly he was the star of the show. Or maybe it was because Sally, who acted like a second mom, was busy keeping everything running, and nobody was really paying much attention to the middle child. You know, the important one, me, Eddie. Back then there was a show on TV hosted by Art Linkletter called Kids Say the Darndest Things. Sometimes I think what the world really needed was a spin-off, Kids Do the Darndest Things, starring Eddie Jansen. I would have been a natural. Chapter 7. Growing up, I wanted to be a Republican. As a child moving into my early teens, I carried a quiet shame about my past. I hated being poor. It stung when other kids made fun of me for the things I couldn't control, like the holes in my jeans. These days, worn-out denim might be a fashion statement, but back then, it was just another reminder that I didn't have what other kids had. I couldn't afford to do the things my friends did. I couldn't buy the newest gadgets or go on the fanciest trips. And deep down, I hated that feeling of being less than. Somewhere along the way, I decided what I wanted most when I grew up. I wanted to be rich. Not for the money itself, but because I thought if I had enough, no one could ever make fun of me again. I thought having money would mean happiness, security, acceptance, and respect. I remember looking at my father differently as I wrestled with these feelings. He tried to help me understand who he was. A proud Democrat, a strong union organizer, a man who fought for working class people. But at the time, I didn't see honor in that. Even before I was old enough to vote, I started calling myself a Republican. In my young mind, Republicans represented success, wealth, admiration, all the things I thought I was missing. Looking back, maybe part of me was ashamed. Ashamed that Dad stood up for the people I was trying so hard not to be associated with. The poor, the struggling, the invisible ones. The truth is, I carried that desire and that shame for a long time into adulthood. Chapter 8. Too soon old, too late smart. As a child, I didn't know what privilege was. I grew up in a middle-class, working-class neighborhood where life felt straightforward and certain. Fathers worked, mothers stayed home, and nearly every family looked like ours. There were no people of color on my street, no immigrants, no conversations about anything outside the narrow, safe little world I knew. It never occurred to me that another world existed, one that didn't feel safe at all. It wasn't until I went off to college at Wayne State University in Detroit that my world began to widen, sometimes painfully so. In my first year, I met Harry. Harry was black. And somehow, despite all my blind spots and inexperience, he chose to be my friend. Sometimes, looking back, I wonder why he bothered with me at all. I had so much to learn. One afternoon early in our friendship, Harry asked me, "Do you know what a DWB is?" I shook my head. "No." He smiled and said, "Driving while black?" I laughed nervously. "What the hell is that?" Harry looked at me, really looked at me, and said, "You don't know anything about my people, do you?" "I guess not," I admitted, feeling small. So he told me, patiently, calmly. He explained how black men were routinely pulled over by the police for no other reason than the color of their skin. I was stunned. I had never heard of such a thing. Not once. Then he asked, "Do you know what a sundown town is?" Again, I shook my head. He explained that sundown towns were places where, after dark, black people were not welcome, where law enforcement or anyone else, might stop, harass, or harm you just for being there. No crime, no wrong. Just being black after sunset was enough. I sat there, feeling my stomach knot up. I realized I had grown up inside a bubble so thick, so deeply padded, that I hadn't even seen the injustice all around me. In that moment, something cracked open inside me. I realized I had lived my life without fear, without the need to explain myself or justify my presence or wonder if I was safe walking down the street. I realized that was privilege. It wasn't something I had earned. It was something I had been handed the moment I was born. That conscience changed me. It changed the way I saw myself, the world, and what I owed to it. It's a lesson that stayed with me ever since. To this day, I know I have a moral and human obligation to stand against injustice, to name it, to face it, to do something about it. Because once your eyes have been opened, you don't get to close them again. Chapter 9. Oh no, Clyde again? Growing up, I never really thought much about food. Mom was a great cook, and as far as I can remember, every meal she made was good, or at least good enough not to complain about. But years later, with a family of my own, I had a meal experience I'll never forget, and not for the reasons you'd hope. After leaving Mount Clemens behind, Jan and I packed up our lives and our two boys, David and Michael, and moved north to Vanderbilt, Michigan. We were true city slickers. From the east side of Detroit, stepping into a world of dirt roads, deep snow, and real country living. Our house at the time was really just a cabin in progress, an exposed basement with a fireplace, a tiny kitchen living room combo, 2 bedrooms, and a small bathroom. It wasn't much, but it was enough. After my brother Jimmy was murdered in a drug deal, Jan and I knew we couldn't raise our kids in the city anymore. We needed a fresh start. So there we were, me, working as a mason's tender in the summer and a lumberjack in the winter, probably the only lumberjack in northern Michigan who could diagram a sentence, and Jan holding everything else together. One day, a guy I worked with, Dave Bunker, came up with a brilliant idea. Let's go halfsies on a bull. Neither of us had ever raised cattle before, but how hard could it be? Dave kept the bull, who he affectionately named Clyde, in a pasture behind his house, and I chipped in for the feed. When butchering day came, Dave, armed with nothing but his hunting experience, figured processing Clyde would be just like field dressing a deer. He shot him, butchered him, wrapped the meat, and dropped off my half at our house. We loaded Clyde into our little freezer, feeling proud of ourselves. Look at us, real country folk. That night, Jan whipped up our first homegrown beef dinner. She cooked it the same way she always had. The boys sat down at the table ready to dig in. And then the smell hit. It was awful. Not just bad. What died in here bad? The next day, I checked in with Dave, who had also noticed that Clyde tasted, well, like Clyde. After a few phone calls, we found out what we had done wrong. Clyde had never been castrated. And when an intact bull is killed, all that testosterone floods the meat, leaving behind a taste and a smell you never forget. Unfortunately, we were broke. Throwing away a freezer full of beef wasn't an option. So for an entire year, every time Jan cooked up a batch of Clyde, the boys would catch a whiff from the kitchen and groan in unison, "Oh no, Clyde again?" We'd laugh, we'd eat, and we'd wonder how many more meals we had left before we were finally free. Chapter 10. My Heroes in Life. Throughout my life, I've been blessed with many role models, too many, really, to mention in a single memoir, but a few stand out. The first, of course, were my parents. My father came from a rough childhood and picked up some bad habits along the way. But what stayed with me most wasn't his flaws, it was how he grew over time. He became a man I deeply admire, and one I still strive to emulate today. Of all the lessons he taught me, the greatest was the importance of being teachable, being willing to admit when you're wrong, apologize, and more importantly, to change. Humility, I've learned, isn't just about saying I'm sorry, it's about growing from it. My mother, too, was an inspiration. Though she was born in the early 20th century, she was a woman ahead of her time. She was as strong as any man I've ever known. She taught me essential life skills: cooking, cleaning, laundry, ironing, things few boys were taught back then. But she also taught me a quieter, deeper strength. I once asked her how she managed to carry so much pain and suffering without letting it show. She simply said, "I cry inside." Later in life, my own son Michael became a role model for me. He taught me the importance of setting healthy boundaries and becoming the person God intended me to be. Through him, I learned that strength sometimes means knowing when to say no and honoring who you are. But without a doubt, the greatest influence on my life has been Trish Gaffney, my wife today. When we first met, Trish was a former Episcopalian and a practicing Zen Buddhist. I have always admired strong women, maybe because of my mother, and Trish was unlike anyone I had known. She challenged me. She made me see the world from new perspectives. And maybe because I was finally becoming teachable, she changed my life forever. But it wasn't a one-way street. As I shared my Christian faith with her, she began to reconnect with her own Christian roots, while still holding to her Zen Buddhist practice. In time, I came to see how much Christianity and Zen have in common, more perhaps than many people realize. I'm reminded of something Gandhi once said: "If I ever met a Christian, I'd become one." Some might take offense at that, but to me, it speaks to a deeper truth. Christ can be a model for how we live, no matter what faith tradition we practice. I remember one pivotal conversation we had about homosexuality. I told Trish, quoting scripture, that it was called an abomination. She paused and simply, "Is that your experience?" That simple question triggered a deep moment of reflection. I thought back to my own experiences with gay people. My mother had once managed the beauty salon at Saks Fifth Avenue in Troy, Michigan, where most of the beauticians were gay men. Every Christmas, she would invite them into our home to celebrate. My experience? They were kind, loving, wonderful human beings, not one of them an abomination to me. I thought of other gay individuals I had met over the years. In truth, every experience I recalled was positive. They had been good to me. They had been good people. On another occasion, after Trish was ordained to the priesthood in the Old Catholic Church, we discussed who should be welcome to receive Holy Eucharist. I said in a self-righteous tone, "That's not how we've done it for 2,000 years. We require baptism first." She simply asked, "Didn't Jesus eat with everyone?" That question shattered my rigid thinking. Today, we have an open table. Everyone is welcome to receive the body and blood of Christ. No conditions, no barriers, just grace. And that, perhaps more than anything else, captures what I have learned from the people who have shaped my life. Be humble, be teachable, be open to love, wherever it may be found. Jack of all trades. When I look back over my life, it's clear that my work experiences have been as varied and colorful as the life I've lived. As I shared earlier, my first real job was working as a caddy at the Country Club of Detroit. After that, while still in high school, I was hired as a clerk at Merritt Drug Store on Kelly Road. During my college years at Wayne State University, I took a job with Beneficial Finance, calling on customers who were delinquent in their payments. It wasn't exactly a dream job. Collections work rarely is. But it kept me afloat through school. After earning my degree, I joined Chesbro Ponds selling surgical supplies to hospitals. I loved that work. I learned so much about the medical profession and had the privilege of getting to know incredible people in rooms and operating rooms. I would often scrub in for surgeries, standing shoulder to shoulder with nurses and doctors. I'll never forget my first experience in the operating room. I was there to demonstrate an underwater chest tube for thoracic surgery, a device that helps the lungs return to normal after the chest has been opened. As I stood watching the surgeons prepare, I noticed the patient was a large man with thick layers of fat around his midsection. When the surgeon made the first cut, blood began oozing out, and I completely lost it. I had to leave the room or pass out. I had to leave. It was embarrassing, but thankfully, everyone in the OR was gracious. In time, I learned how to handle myself, even though surgeries were never exactly my favorite part of the job. Worse, though, was visiting Children's Hospital in Detroit to witness doctors using our gauze to bride burn wounds. For reasons I never understood, the children were often awake during the procedure. The screams of those little ones haunt me to this day. When we moved north to Vanderbilt, my career shifted again. In the summers, I worked as a mason's tender, hauling cement blocks to job sites. In the winters, I became a lumberjack. My job was to cut logs into 100-inch pieces once they were dragged in by the skidder. It was the most dangerous work I ever did. On my second day, I witnessed a man, a veteran woodsman, lose his nose and left eye when his jaw kicked back and struck him in the face. I learned quickly that the woods demanded both respect and caution. Eventually, I transitioned to selling real estate, where I did well enough that someone encouraged me to start my own business. As the business grew, I branched into the travel industry. Thanks to my sons, who had written a custom data program on the computer I had given them for Christmas, the travel side of the business flourished. An opportunity came when my vice president suggested we partner with American Airlines as they were expanding into the European market. We flew to Texas, made a presentation, and won the contract. For a time, business exploded. We were handling group travel all over North America. But success was short-lived. I lost everything a few years later due to my alcohol addiction. After that collapse, I moved to Florida and started a cleaning business. By then, something had begun stirring in me, a sense of calling. I entered seminary and was ordained to the priesthood in 1996. I started a small church in Stuart, Florida, though it never grew the way I hoped. When Trish's father passed away, we decided to move to Maryland and renovate the home she inherited in Severna. With part of the inheritance, we started the Emmaus Center, a ministry for people experiencing homelessness and poverty. For 12 years, we had the incredible privilege of serving those living on the streets or struggling to survive. That season of my life changed me again. I was no longer living for me, but learning every day what it meant to live for and none of it would have been possible without Trish Gaffney. Today, we continue volunteering at Arundel House of Hope. We work with people seeking addiction recovery, Bible study on Saturdays, and offer an anger management workshop. On Sundays, we hold a small service for those seeking God and serve a meal afterward. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, we feed our friends again, and we're blessed to have Yvette and John join us in the work. Looking back on everything, every rise and every fall, I can honestly say I wouldn't be happier doing anything else. Chapter 12, Where I Found Joy. The pleasures I've experienced throughout my life have evolved, much like my life itself. What delighted me as a child rarely brings me the same joy today, and yet each season has offered its own kind of beauty. Life has been a journey, and the things that once made me happy were stepping stones that led to a deeper understanding of what true joy really is. As a young boy, I found happiness in being noticed. If someone paid attention to me, that was enough. That sense of being seen, valued, it filled my small heart with contentment. In my teenage years, my pleasures became more adventurous. I found joy in the structure and camaraderie of scouting, the thrill of camping beneath open skies, and pheasant hunting with my dad. Sports became a passion, especially tennis and diving on the high school swim team. I loved the focus, the competition, the way the water made me feel both weightless and strong. As an adult, I was fortunate to experience pleasures many only dream of. I traveled through much of Europe and met fascinating people along the way. I skied the snow-covered slopes of the Kitzbühel Horn in the Austrian Alps and scuba dived in the waters off Mexico and Florida. I hunted lobsters, explored sunken ships, and drifted weightlessly beneath the sea's surface. I've been on many cruises, my favorite being a 2-week voyage across the Mediterranean. I fly fished the Sturgeon River in Michigan, only to be confronted by a snorting bull elk, clearly unhappy with my presence in his territory. I dined in some of the finest restaurants in the world and sipped champagne that costs more than I care to admit. As grateful as I am for those experiences, every thrill, every indulgence, none of them compared to the pleasure I find in the life I'm living today. I've come to understand that real joy doesn't come from getting what I want. It comes from helping others get what they need. I know that may sound like a cliche, but for me it's not. It's the truest thing I've ever known. I get to witness people broken by addiction, on the brink of despair, choose life again. I've seen men and women rise out of hopelessness, find sobriety, get a job, believe in themselves again. And to know I've played even a small part in that journey, there is simply no greater joy. The work I do now gives me something that money, travel, and fine dining never could. The feeling that my life is useful, that I am useful, that my life, my whole messy, beautiful, broken, and redeemed life is worth living. And here's something I've thought about. If I were 30 years younger, in good physical, emotional, and spiritual health, and had all the money I'd ever need, I wouldn't want to be doing anything else. Not a thing. To be living this life and to be doing it alongside someone who loves me, well, it just doesn't get any better than this. Chapter 13. Heaven will be outdoors. I've lived in the city and I've lived in the country, but when I imagine heaven, I don't see golden streets or pearly gates. I picture a small log cabin tucked deep in the woods with a clear stream running nearby. A quiet place, a sacred place. I wouldn't want to be alone there. I'd love for family and friends to visit from time to time, to share stories, laughter, and silence together. People often think I'm an extrovert, and in many ways I am. I love meaningful conversation, especially when I find shared ground with others. But I also love encountering people who are different from me, because I believe there's something to learn from every soul I meet. That said, I deeply value my solitude. Moments of quiet feed my spirit. I find joy in writing this memoir while Trish sits nearby, focused on her iconography. We may not speak, but we are together, each creating, each listening in our own way. I enjoy meditation, not just as a practice, but as a way of being present with God. In the stillness, I receive insights that guide my daily life. Gentle nudges, quiet wisdom, deep peace. So, am I a city person or a nature person? The answer I've come to know is this. I'm a nature person. I love the outdoors. I love the hush of the woods, the rhythm of a stream, the scent of pine and fresh earth. Being in nature connects me to God in a way few things can. It humbles me, grounds me, and fills me with awe. I've had the privilege of witnessing some of the world's wonders. Years ago, a few friends from Gaylord and I would drive as far north as those would take us, then charter a small plane to fly us into the Arctic Circle to fish. We'd go at a time of year when the sun barely slept, 21 hours of daylight. But for 3 hours each night, the sky would come alive with the northern lights. The aurora borealis, I have never seen anything so majestic. It was as if heaven itself had opened a curtain and let us peek behind. When I lived in Florida, I would go scuba diving. I'd slip beneath the waves and settle on the ocean floor. The only sound was the slow rising bubbles of my breath, and in that stillness the creatures of the deep would emerge, curious, gentle, unafraid. In those moments, I didn't feel like an intruder. I felt like I belonged. That too was worship. That too was communion. Yes, I am someone who loves nature, not just because it is beautiful, but because in it I feel close to God. And perhaps that is the truest kind of heaven. Chapter 14. Help. I was about 5 years old when I experienced one of the most unforgettable events of my life. I remember it vividly, as if it happened only yesterday. It was a bright, sunny Saturday in the middle of summer. That morning, I'd been watching a television program about life-saving. The show featured instructors and participants inside an indoor pool, teaching techniques on how to rescue someone who was drowning. One thing the instructor said stuck with me. A drowning person can be dangerous because they're terrified. They'll do anything to survive, even if it means pulling their rescuer under. The key, the instructor explained, was to approach the drowning person from behind if possible. I didn't know it then, but that bit of advice would take root in my mind and matter much more than I could have ever imagined. Later that day, I left with my mom and her friend Ella Schneck to spend time at Sinbad's in Detroit, where Mom and Dad kept their boat docked. I was excited. Just being near the water, maybe even getting in some fishing, was enough to make the day special. When we arrived at the marina, Mom and Ella carried their things down to the boat, including a cooler with a few cold beers. I climbed on board, eager to find my fishing rod, but Mom quickly told me they had accidentally left it at home. She looked genuinely sorry, and to make up for it, she handed me a little toy boat tied to a string, something to play with from the dock. While she and Della settled on the back deck, chatting and sipping their beers, I knelt at the edge of the dock, floating the tiny boat in the water and guiding it gently along with the string. I was completely lost in the moment. Without thinking, I leaned out over the edge to grab it and fell headfirst into the water. Panic set in. I didn't know how to swim. I was flailing, sinking, rising, fighting to keep my head above water. I remember surfacing just long enough to see Mom and Della still on the deck, laughing, completely unaware of what was happening. I screamed, "Mom, help me!" Before slipping under again, the current slowly pulling me farther from the dock. I truly thought I was going to die. Then, through the chaos, I saw her, Mom, in the water, swimming toward me. As she neared, my mind flashed back to that life-saving show from earlier that morning. I remembered how the instructor said a drowning person could become a threat to their rescuer. Even at 5 years old, I made a decision. I won't fight her. I'll help her save me. When she reached me, she stretched out her hands and I grabbed hold. She had no formal training in life-saving, but with strength, determination, and maybe a little help from her terrified 5-year-old, she pulled me safely back to the dock. Soaking wet, heart pounding, I sat there on the deck, overwhelmed with relief. Mom had saved my life. And, as if that weren't enough, she even rescued my little toy boat. It's only with time that I've come to understand how extraordinary that day really was. There's something mysterious, almost divine, about the timing of that morning's television program. Why that show on that day? Why did that one lesson about drowning and rescue sink so deeply into the mind of a 5-year-old? Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was grace. What I know is this: that moment shaped something in me. It taught me that even in chaos, if we remain calm and willing to trust, help can come. It taught me that a mother's love is fierce and instinctive, and that you don't have to be trained to be brave. And perhaps most of all, it taught me that sometimes God speaks before we even know we're in trouble. That morning, God used a television screen to plant a seed in my mind, preparing me to survive the very fear I didn't yet know was coming. Yes, I was 5 years old when I nearly drowned, but I was also 5 years old when I learned how to trust, how to stay calm in crisis, and how to hold out my hands and say, without words, please, save me. And someone did. Chapter 15. No pain, no gain. As I look back on my life in its entirety, one thing becomes unmistakably clear. I have changed tremendously. And if I'm being honest, I can say that I like Ed Jansen today more than I've ever liked him before. That has been the case. There's much in my past that I'm not proud of. I've made mistakes, plenty of them. I've hurt people, disappointed others, and at times even disappointed myself. Like many, I've wished for the ability to go back and rewrite the past. But here's the truth. I wouldn't change a single thing for me. If I could, I would change the past only for the sake of those I hurt, for those who were affected by my selfishness or ignorance. I would want to spare them. But for myself, I wouldn't rewrite a thing, because every misstep, every failure, every moment I got it wrong has offered me an opportunity to grow. Have I learned every time? Or no. Have I grown with each mistake? Not immediately, but I'm working on it. What I've come to understand is that mistakes, while painful, are deeply human. And when we approach them with humility, they become the very soil where transformation takes root. So what have I been especially good at? At times, being teachable. It's not a flashy talent, but it's one I've come to cherish. It's made all the difference. When I was an undergrad at Wayne State University, I wrote an essay on human development. I'd like to share it with you here because it still speaks to who I am becoming. There was once a man who traveled from town to town teaching the wonders of math. In each place he would stand proudly before them and announce, "Ladies and gentlemen, I am the great mathematician, and I have come to teach you the wonders of numbers." He would begin, "The first wonder of math is that 3 plus 3 equals 6. Applause. The second wonder is that 4 plus 4 equals 8. More applause. And the final wonder, 5 plus 5 equals 11. The crowd would cheer, and with a satisfied heart, he would pack his things and move on to the next town. One day he heard that a great master mathematician was coming to the next village, the one he had to visit. Excited, he hoped to impress the master, though he had no idea who the master was or what they looked like. So he entered the town, made his usual presentation, confident, proud, convincing. The people applauded as they always did, but there was no sign of the master. Disappointed, he packed up and began walking toward the next town. That's when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned and saw a woman standing behind him. "You're the great mathematician, aren't you?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. "And who are you?" "I am the master mathematician," she said. He blinked in disbelief. "You? A woman?" She smiled gently. "Yes." Excited, he asked, "Did you see my presentation?" "I did," she nodded. "I think you love math," she said. "Oh, yes, it's my passion." "You teach it well," she affirmed. His chest swelled with pride. Then she added, "But there are a few things we should talk about." "Of course," he said. "You're absolutely right when you say that 3 plus 3 equals 6, and that 4 plus 4 equals 8. He smiled. "But," she continued, "you're mistaken. 5 plus 5 does not equal 11. It equals 10. His smile faded. "You mean I've been wrong all this time?" She nodded. "Yes." He fell to his knees, eyes lifted to the sky, and cried out, "Oh my God, I've been wrong all these years. 5 plus 5 doesn't equal 11. It equals 10. The master extended her hand and helped him to his feet. Looking him in the eyes, she said, "Today you have become a better mathematician." That story has stayed with me over the years because I lived much of my life proclaiming my rightness. I clung to certainty, held fast to pride, and thought growth came through being right. But I was wrong. It's only when I began to see where I had been mistaken, only when I had the courage to admit it, to say I was wrong and mean it, that I began to grow. Today I am grateful not for perfection, not for pride, but for the gift of being teachable, because it is in being teachable that we become better people, better leaders, better lovers, better friends, better followers of Christ, better whatever. And today I can say I am becoming better because I am to be wrong and learn. Chapter life is a journey. As someone who has worked the 12 steps of recovery, I can freely and fully own the character defects and flaws I'm aware of today. That doesn't mean I've eliminated them. Far from it. I'm certain there are flaws I still can't see, and even the ones I'm aware of haven't all disappeared. But I can say this with honesty. I carry fewer defects now than I ever have before. That's not to suggest I've arrived. Not even close. I know with all my heart that I will leave this life still unfinished, still in progress. For me, life has been a process of transformation, of becoming, a slow, stumbling, but sacred evolution. And at the heart of that process has been a movement, from me to we. That shift has been gradual, and there are still plenty of me parts in me. Selfishness doesn't vanish overnight. But today, there are also pieces of me, precious, hard-earned pieces, that are firmly rooted in we. And what I've discovered in this shift is something both surprising and beautifully ironic. The more I move away from me, the more content me becomes. I think God has a sense of humor about that. We are all born self-centered. That's not a judgment. It's a human truth. We start off the journey looking for happiness, purpose, and fulfillment in things that serve us. And yet some of us die having never truly found those things. I believe it's because we never made the shift. We never moved from me to we. Does that make sense? In my own life, I found that I am least happy when I focus on my needs, my desires, my agenda. That's not to say I don't still need support or encouragement or purpose. Of course I do. But those aren't my focus anymore. They're not the goal. Perhaps the best way I can describe this ongoing movement in me is through a prayer I came across, one written by Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh, meant to be spoken before a meal. This food is a gift of the earth, the sky, numerous living beings, and much hard and loving work. May we eat with mindfulness and gratitude so as to be worthy to receive this food. May we recognize and transform unwholesome mental formations, especially our greed, and learn to eat with moderation. May we keep our compassion alive by eating in such a way that reduces the suffering of living beings and heals and preserves our precious planet. We accept this food so that we may nurture our brotherhood and sisterhood, build our spiritual community, and realize our ideal of serving all living beings. That prayer speaks to something I feel deep in my bones. This transformation isn't just about moving from me to you and me. It's about all of us. It's about creation. It's about community. It's about connection. Every living being God has made today. Trish and I volunteer at a homeless resource center in Glen Burnie. We call our work together with Hope. It's a partnership with the Arundel House of Hope. And the more time I spend there, shoulder to shoulder with people society often overlooks, the more I realize how deeply true this is. We are all in this together. When I can make we not just you and me, but you, me, and all of creation, I begin to grasp the wonder of life in its fullness. No, I haven't arrived. I'm still growing, still shedding the layers of me I once clung to. But every step I take in that direction brings more light into my life, more love, more compassion, more joy, and perhaps most of all, more purpose. God, help me live what I've just spoken. And when I forget, help me return to this path of becoming. Chapter 17. When my heart and my mind are open. I don't believe there was one single pivotal moment that shaped who I am today. Instead, my life has been, as I've said before, a journey, a long, humbling process of transformation. Along that path, there have been people and experiences that redirected my thinking, reshaped my values, and helped me become the man I am. For each of them, I am deeply, eternally grateful. Here are just a few of those people, knowing full well this list could never be complete. Trish Gaffney. After many failed relationships, I found in Trish the partner who has had the most transformative influence on my life. We've been married for over 20 years now, and I thank God for her every single day. It still makes me smile, a conservative priest and a Zen feminist. What a match. And yet we have become something beautiful together. Trish has changed me more than anyone, and she's done it with grace, insight, and love. She never pushed, but gently invited me to consider other perspectives, especially on things I thought were long settled. I had my own strong opinions, but I was teachable. And the more I loved her, the more I listened. The more I listened, the more I understood. And the more I understood, the more I wanted to walk with her, not just as a partner, but as one in heart, in spirit, in purpose. Leo Jansen. My father was a complicated man, broken in many ways, but also a powerful influence in my life. He made mistakes. He did things I swore I'd never do to my own children, and I didn't. But Dad's life, much like mine, was the story of transformation. I watched him change over time. I watched him soften, and for that I admire him deeply. Marian Jansen. My mother, in many ways, prepared me for Trish. She was an independent spirit, strong, free, and unwilling to be confined by traditional gender roles. In an era when women were expected to stay in their place, she chose her own place. She taught me strength, resilience, and a quiet defiance that lives on in me. Thank you, Mom. Michael Jansen. My son Mike has had a profound impact on my life. He has shown me what it means to love unconditionally and to accept someone fully, past, present, and all. He is a wonderful father, a devoted husband, and a man I deeply respect. Mike, I see the man you become, and I couldn't be prouder. Keep going. You're doing beautiful work. Sally Jansen Lightbody. My sister Sally is one of the most resilient people I know. I've watched her grow through unspeakable losses without ever giving up. When her firstborn, Richie, passed away from leukemia at the age of 4, she transformed her grief into service. She began volunteering at the very hospital where Richie died, offering comfort to other parents walking the same agonizing road. That's courage. That's love. That's the gospel lived out. I admire you deeply, Sal. Bishop Chuck Lee. Chuck was our bishop when I left the Episcopal Church. He has been a living example of servant leadership. Trish and I first visited his independent Catholic church in Tampa on a Wednesday night. During the Mass, something unusual happened. When it came time for the gospel reading, a woman walked up to the lectern with what looked like a child's coloring book. After the service, curious and a little confused, I asked Chuck, "What's the story we're reading the gospel?" He smiled and said, "She learned to read here, in our church. I let her read from her book because it matters to her, and it matters to us. That moment opened a door in my heart. It was the beginning of my journey into liberation theology and my embrace of the idea that God has a preferential option for the poor. Today, that belief shapes how I live, how I serve, and how I love. Chuck helped me see the gospel in new ways I'd never imagined before. Each of these people has left a mark on me. Some were gentle teachers, some taught me through pain, but all of them redirected my path in some way toward truth, toward humility, toward grace. And through their influence, I am still becoming, or still learning, still moving from me to we. Chapter 18. There's not a nickel's difference. If I had to name the most important decision I've ever made in my life, it wouldn't be one that happened with fireworks or fanfare. It happened quietly during a simple conversation, one that I didn't fully understand at the time. It took place when I was living in Florida, serving as director of a recovery program at First Baptist Church of Stewart. To my knowledge, it was the only Christ-centered, biblically based 12-step program in the area. We met on Wednesday nights, presenting one of the 12 steps each week, along with scripture passages that supported that particular step. After the teaching, we'd break into small groups, alcoholics, codependents, overeaters, and so on. Looking back, I think it was one of the more self-righteous seasons of my life. I was passionate about the program, but I was also convinced I was doing things the right way. Then, one day, I met a country preacher who worked in addiction recovery. I can't remember his name now, but I remember his presence. We were chatting about our different approaches, and I'm sure I came across as smug. Somewhere in that conversation, he paused, looked at me kindly, and said, "You know, Ed, there's not a nickel's difference between the best of us and the worst of us. We're all cut out of the same cookie dough." I nodded and smiled politely, not really understanding what he meant, and certainly not realizing he might have been talking about me. Inside, I thought, well, sure, that sounds nice and humble and all, but let's be real. There are a lot of people worse off than me. At least I got into recovery. I turned my life around. But somewhere deep down, his words took root. Over the years that followed, life had a way of bringing me back to that moment. Notice things, little confirmations that what he said wasn't just a homespun saying, but profound truth. I remember reading a report from Pfizer not long after that encounter. It said more than 60% of human DNA is identical to that of a chicken, a fruit fly, or even a banana, and that 96% of our DNA is shared with chimpanzees. The most surprising part, the difference in DNA between any two humans is less than 1%. That stopped me in my tracks. What is DNA, I wondered? It's the molecule that carries genetic code unique to each of us. It defines who we are, and yet over 99% of mine is identical to yours, to everyone's. That discovery sent me on a quiet, humble quest, one to understand the oneness of humanity. If I share over half my genetic makeup with a banana, and nearly all of it with you, how different could we really be? Surely there's more that unites us than separates us. Of course, not everyone was convinced. I once shared this idea with someone who scoffed and said, "I don't care about DNA. It's how we live that makes the difference." I get it, and there's truth in that. But I also believe this. We all fall short of the glory of God. Your failures may look different than mine, but at the core, we're all made of the same stuff. That old preacher was right. There's not a nickel's difference between the best of us and the worst of us. We're all cut out of the same cookie dough. That truth has transformed the way I relate to people. It's humbled me, softened me, opened my heart in ways I didn't know were possible, and it's left me with a quiet conviction we're all in this together, whether we realize it or not. Chapter 19, My Life Changer. Whether one identifies as a Christian or not, I believe it's hard to argue with the core teachings of Jesus, especially when we begin to shift from a life of me, to one rooted in we. Regardless of whether one believes Jesus is the Messiah, it's difficult to find fault with how he lived, how he loved, and how he responded to the world around him. You don't have to hold to any particular theology to recognize the beauty in his example. Jesus has served as a model for humanity for centuries, for his compassion, humility, justice, and unwavering commitment to peace. I deeply admire the way he lived. I honor the way he treated people in need. And I am inspired by his nonviolent approach to conflict and power. Do I fall short of that standard? Every day. But still, every day, I want to become more like him. The path I've chosen to follow Christ isn't an easy one, but as someone once said, Jesus never promised us an easy life. He promised it would be worth it. That truth echoes for me in a powerful scene from the 1982 film Gandhi. The movie depicts the historic Salt March of 1930, where Mahatma Gandhi led 5,000 men on a 120-mile walk to the Arabian Sea. Their goal, to defy the British colonial salt tax by making their own salt, a peaceful protest against an unjust law. Under British rule, it was illegal for Indians to produce or sell salt independently, but Gandhi's march was a bold act of civil disobedience, a public stand against oppression. When the marchers reached the coastal desalination site and attempted to take control, they were met with violence. British-led forces struck down the peaceful protesters, beating them with batons while they offered no resistance. One by one, men stepped forward. One by one, they were beaten down. And yet, they did not strike back. The scene is haunting, powerful, and unforgettable. The world watched, and the world was ashamed. The brutality of the British response became an international disgrace. In time, that shame played a direct role in shifting global sentiment, and ultimately in the British withdrawal from India. Today, India stands as a sovereign nation, in no small part because of that nonviolent resistance. The men who marched that day were not Christians. Many were Hindus, many were Muslims. But what they embodied, what they lived, was the teaching of Christ. Through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, God has shown me a better way. Not the way of power or revenge or violence, but the way of love, compassion, and forgiveness. I believe that is the only path that truly leads to peace. Chapter 20, Moving Up North. There was an event in my life, simple but unforgettable, that completely shifted my perspective about a culture I once misunderstood. It was the 1970s. After my brother's death, our family left the Detroit area and moved to Vanderbilt, Michigan. We were city slickers, grieving and disoriented in small-town country life. That first fall, we became friends with Dave and Rita Bunker, lifelong residents of Vanderbilt and parents of 12 children. They were devout Roman Catholics, full of humor and hospitality, and quickly welcomed us in. One winter night, they invited us over for pinochle. When we entered their home, the first thing we noticed was a duck sitting in the living room, calmly staring at its own reflection in a mirror propped against the wall. We sat down in the kitchen, sipping coffee and talking about life in the North. Suddenly, Dave stood up, grabbed the cat, opened a kitchen cabinet, tossed the cat inside, and shut the door. Jan and I were stunned. A moment later, we heard some rustling. Dave opened the door, and out came the cat with a mouse in its mouth. Without comment, he carried the cat and mouse outside. Still processing, I turned to Rita and asked, "Why is there a duck in your living room?" She said, "His mate died this morning. We didn't want him to freeze." And the mirror? So he wouldn't feel lonely. That night was my first true encounter with country people, At first, it was easy to laugh, city instincts kicking in. A duck in the living room, a cat in the cabinet, really. But what I came to understand was this: Dave and Rita weren't strange. They were human, deeply human. They had their own way of doing things, practical, rooted, surprisingly tender. Would I keep a duck indoors? Probably not. Toss a cat in a cupboard? No thanks. But I learned something lasting from them. Something about the richness of life beyond my own frame of reference. Years later, I was hospitalized with chest pains. A blocked artery led to a stent, and doctors advised lifestyle changes, especially diet. Trish, who had been a vegetarian before we met, gently introduced the idea of plant-based eating. I resisted at first, but eventually proposed a 30-day vegan trial. No meat, no dairy, nothing with the face, or from a face. It wasn't easy, but we did it. That trial became a 15-year journey of plant-based living. Health issues eventually led me to reintroduce small amounts of fish and dairy, but the way I saw food and life was already changed. So what does this have to do with Dave and Rita? They hunted, they fished, they filled their freezer with venison and stocked their pantry with canned fish. And still they brought a grieving duck indoors and gave it companionship. In recovery, there's a saying, take what you need and leave the rest. That's exactly what I did with Dave and Rita. I didn't adopt every aspect of their life, but I carried their compassion with me. I learned from their love for animals, for each other, for people like us who were strangers in a strange land. Their lives taught me that real connection isn't about shared habits. It's about shared humanity. It's because of them I learned that we're all in this together. Diversity, I've come to believe, is one of God's greatest gifts. It's what stretches us, humbles us, and opens our hearts to wisdom we never knew we needed. Trish often says, if two people are exactly alike, one of them is unnecessary. And I've found that to be true. We grow when we listen. We grow when we open ourselves to what's unfamiliar. And we grow when we allow others, like Dave and Rita, to shape our thinking, soften our judgments, and remind us that love wears many faces, sometimes even a duck's. Chapter 21, Leaving the City Life. As I've shared throughout this memoir, one of the most profound cultural shifts in my life occurred when Jan and I moved from suburban Detroit to northern Michigan. I was born and raised in an urban environment, and while we occasionally camped out at Otsego State Park in Gaylord or hunted pheasants in the fall, I was, for all intents and purposes, a city slicker. We left behind a beautiful villa in Mount Clemens, just across the knoll from my parents, and relocated to an unfinished exposed basement on 10 remote acres outside Vanderbilt. Our nearest neighbors were miles away. Along with that move came a dramatic lifestyle change. I left behind a prestigious job selling surgical supplies, a role that had me scrubbing in on operations and training surgeons on advanced medical devices. In its place, I became a mason's tender in the summer, carrying cement blocks by hand, and a lumberjack in the winter, cutting logs into 100-inch lengths with a chainsaw and pickaroon. This drastic shift wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. It awakened something in me that remains to this day, a deep love for the outdoors and a reverence for God's creation. I found joy in simplicity and awe in stillness. I began fly fishing on quiet streams, which in later years led me to resting on the ocean floor while sea creatures cautiously approached, wondering, who in the heck was this strange thing? Over time, I realized I loved winter's silence and summer's heat. I grew to love cedar swamps as much as I loved palm trees. I found beauty in both the crunch of snow underfoot and the soft shimmer of green grass in the wintertime in South Florida. I marveled at the northern lights stretching across the sky. I welcomed birdsong at dawn. I learned to treasure the holiness of sunrises and sunsets, each one a silent hymn of praise. If I have any say in what heaven looks like, it won't be paved in gold or bound by walls. It will be outside, wild, sacred, and full of wonder. It will be nature, alive with the beauty of God's creation fully in view. Chapter 22. The Process of Transformation. The ritual that has become central in my life today is something relatively new, especially when measured against the winding road that brought me here. Back in the 1960s, I lived by a mantra common to the era: if it feels good, do it. For a while, alcohol felt good, and eventually it took over. By my 42nd, I had become a full-blown alcoholic. But when I finally came to grips with my disease, no longer hiding behind denial, I entered recovery. That decision marked a turning point. The 12 steps of AA, along with the God of my understanding, became the focus of a new ritual, one centered on healing and humility. In time, I also returned to the faith of my youth and embraced evangelical Christianity. I was taught that the Bible was the absolute authority, God's word in every sense. I was told that if I followed it faithfully, God would bless me. Some even suggested I'd be financially rewarded for my obedience. But life and grace had more to teach me. Looking back now, I'm incredibly grateful for the gift of teachability. Seminary and the study of church history opened my eyes in ways I hadn't expected. I learned that throughout history, the Bible had been used not only for inspiration and healing, but also to justify deep harm. Consider just a few examples: the Crusades, the Inquisition, witch hunts, slavery in the Americas, anti-Semitism, persecution of LGBTQ plus people, the oppression of women, abuse within Christian institutions. While many Christians today rightly condemn these actions, those who committed them often believe they were doing God's will, using Scripture to back ideologies rooted in power, fear, or control. That realization sobered me. It showed me how theology, when detached from compassion, can be dangerous and deadly. And yet, I still love the sacred Scriptures. But I've learned to approach them with humility rather than certainty. I no longer cling to rigid interpretations or use Scripture as a weapon. Instead, I rely on a ritual that guides me when I'm unsure how to act, speak, or respond. I ask myself, what would Jesus do? It's simple. It's not always easy, but it recenters me in love. That question has become my compass, my grounding ritual, and it continues to shape the person I strive to be. Chapter 23. How do I respond to evil? The greatest challenge in my life today is answering a question that has haunted thoughtful people for generations. How do I respond to evil in the world? Dietrich Bonhoeffer, the German theologian, wrestled with this question in perhaps one of the most morally complex times in history. As a committed Christian pacifist, Bonhoeffer struggled deeply with his decision to join a conspiracy to assassinate Adolf Hitler. His writings reveal a man torn between faith, justice, and conscience, a man acted knowing full well the cost. While my own life looks nothing like Bonhoeffer's, I find myself echoing his internal conflict as I witness troubling changes in my country. I see hatred rising, cruelty justified, compassion dismissed. Inside, I scream. I feel fear, anger, judgment, and if I'm honest, even a thirst for retribution. Then my observing ego speaks. You're becoming the very thing you condemn. Ouch. In those moments, I realize I don't want to love like Jesus. I want people who cause suffering to suffer in turn. I want those who spread judgment and cruelty to taste the weight of their actions. I can even quote Scripture to justify those feelings. For whatever one sows, that he shall also reap, But that's not the full gospel, is it? I think of our friend Yvette, who volunteers with us at the Arundel House of Hope, serving people experiencing homelessness. She is a true light in the world. Yvette greets everyone by name, remembers them, affirms them, and lifts them up with kindness. She doesn't dwell on politics or darkness. She radiates hope. And I'm not wired like her. I believe we need people like her. People who carry joy, encouragement, and compassion into every corner of pain. But me? I'm not built to stay silent. I can't simply hope for the best. I feel compelled to act. And when I get fired up, I reach history to back me up. Look what happened when good people in Germany stayed silent in the 1930s. We must speak, we must move, we must do something. So then what do? Do I become a modern Bonhoeffer? No, that's not my call. But do I sit back and do nothing? Absolutely not. So what is my path? If I claim to be a follower of Jesus, then my response must reflect his life, not just my emotions. He said, if anyone wants to be my disciple, they must deny themselves, take up their cross and follow me. Not follow the Bible, not follow your anger, but follow me. It means crucifying the urge to lash out in judgment. It means choosing love again and again, especially when it's hard. So what does that look like in practice? First, I will vote for leaders whose actions most closely reflect the values Jesus lived: compassion, justice, humility, mercy. Second, I will never resort to violence, not in word, not in deed. Third, I will confront injustice where I see it. I will not let cruelty, discrimination, or indifference become normalized, not in my home, my community, or my heart. And lastly, I will continue to do the things Jesus did: heal, feed, welcome, listen, love. That's it. At the end of my life, when I stand before God, I want to be able to say, I gave it my best, Lord. And I pray that God will respond, "What good and faithful servant." Chapter 24, The Best New Year's Day Ever. One of the happiest moments of my life came on January 1st, 1986. I was living in Gaylord, Michigan, and that morning I woke up to a brand new year without a hangover. That might sound simple, but for me, it was monumental. It had been years since I'd greeted a New Year's Day without nausea, a pounding headache, or the urge to hide beneath the covers. No more hair of the dog remedies. No more regret. That morning I felt fantastic, clear-headed, energized, and full of joy, hope, and anticipation. I was a member of the Otsego Ski Club, and the weather was perfect. So I jumped in the shower, threw on my ski gear, grabbed my skis, and headed to the hill. When I arrived, the place looked deserted. For a moment I wondered if they were even open. But then I saw the lifts running, so I strapped in and hit the slopes. Run after run, I glided down the mountain, relishing every moment. Eventually, more skiers trickled in, but for the first hour or so, it felt like I had the whole place to myself. I skied for over 4 hours, fueled by sheer gratitude and the joy of being fully alive. But I was feeling hungry, so I took off my ski stuff and went into the clubhouse for lunch. As I was walking down the hall toward the dining room, I saw George, the food and beverage manager. George knew me well as a member who frequently enjoyed both food and beverage at the club. I saw him smile at me as we walked toward one another. He then said, "Good morning, Mr. Jansen." I smiled back at him. We both knew I was feeling great. He also knew that I had stopped drinking on July 18th, 1985. I responded back, "Good morning, George. It's good to see you this morning." He chuckled out loud and said, "Yes, indeed. It's a good day to be alive." Chapter 25, My Brokenness. Like most people, I've experienced my share of heartbreaking moments. I've lost a brother, both of my parents, grandparents, cousins, nephews, and other extended family members. But perhaps one of the most painful losses has been the distance between me and my son David, a kind of silent separation often referred to as ghosting. That loss still lingers today. The grief from all of these losses runs deep, but there's little I can say about them that hasn't already been felt in the silence of my soul. So instead, I'll tell you about a different kind of heartbreak, one that began with success and ended with humility, but not without grace. There was a time when I was a successful businessman. I had launched a real estate company and expanded it by opening a travel agency under the bold name Ed Jansen, Unlimited Inc. Not long after, I hired a man named Richard, an experienced professional who had spent much of his life in the British travel industry. He had knowledge I didn't, and together we made a strong team. Richard helped us get certified with American Airlines Sabre system, a booking platform used by a large portion of North American travel agents. One day he came to me with an idea. American Airlines was preparing to expand into the European market. He proposed that we create a separate corporation, Marco Polo Tours, that would specialize in European group travel directly through Sabre. I was excited. We spent a year gathering pricing data from hotels, rental agencies, and tour providers across Europe, but we had one major hurdle: how to transfer all that information into a functioning data system. That's when my two sons stepped in. I had given them a computer for Christmas. This was the 1980s, long before kids were learning coding in school. But David and Michael learned quickly. They wrote a program and entered all the data we'd compiled. The timing couldn't have been better. American Airlines was just about to announce its European expansion. Richard and I flew to Dallas to pitch our idea to Americans' leadership. We asked to be their exclusive supplier of European tours through Sabre. They asked, "Can you be operational in 30 days?" Richard said yes. I wasn't so sure, but somehow we pulled it off. The response was immediate. On day 1, we had 4 inquiries. On day 2, 30, and then an explosion. We were thriving, but something wasn't right. Despite our success, we were facing an unexplained cash flow crisis. Eventually, the truth came out. Richard had embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars. The name Marco Polo Tours, which he suggested, was already registered in the UK under a company he secretly owned. We were unknowingly funneling profits to his overseas business. He was arrested and sent to prison. I was left bankrupt, reputation shattered, debts I couldn't pay, and a business that collapsed around me. I left Gaylord heartbroken and humiliated. From a successful entrepreneur, I became a man starting over, cleaning condos in Florida for $6 an hour. And yet, I wouldn't trade that chapter of my life for anything. Someone once told me God builds out of ruins, and that became true for me. I was broken, but not beyond repair. Over time, God reshaped my life into something more meaningful than I had known before. Today, it's no longer about the money. It's about purpose. It's about becoming the man I was always meant to be. And that's no brag. I often say this with a smile. If you're not impressed with who I am today, you should have known me 50 years ago. Chapter 26. Yes, I was a poacher. When Jan and I first moved to northern Michigan, we faced some tough times. Money was tight, and with Michael only 3 years old, Jan couldn't work outside the home. There were days I wasn't sure how I was going to put food on the table. One evening, my friend Dave Bunker, who knew we were struggling, offered a solution. "Let's go hunting tonight," he said. "Hunting? At night? Dave, it's not even deer season." He just smiled and replied, "Do you need food or not?" I hesitated, unsure. Dave saw the look on my face and said, "I'll pick you up at 9. It'll be dark by then." Sure enough, at 9 p.m., Dave pulled into the driveway with his truck. He stepped out holding a rifle and a massive flashlight. He handed me the light and said, "We can walk from here." We lived in the woods, and not far from the house was an open field where deer were often seen, day and night. We quietly made our way to a tree at the edge of the field and sat down in the dark. "Turn on the light when I tell you," Dave whispered. About 15 minutes passed in silence. Then, "Okay, now, turn it on. Aim straight out." I clicked on the light and swept it across the field. "A little to the left," he whispered again. I adjusted the beam, and suddenly, there they were, 2 deer, standing still in the glow of the light. To this day, I have no idea how Dave knew they were out there. It was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing until the beam hit them. Then, bang, the rifle went off. Startled, I turned off the light. Dave stood up calmly and told me to turn it back on as we approached the downed deer. But before we could get close, we heard something, the distant sound of a car approaching. Then we saw the headlights. Dave crouched and hissed, "Get down! Don't say a word!" We hit the ground. As the car rolled closer, we could see someone inside, scanning the area with a flashlight. My heart was pounding. Dave muttered, "That's the DNR, Department of Natural Resources. They're looking for poachers." Suddenly we heard rustling from the wounded buck. Without hesitation, Dave crawled up onto the deer to keep it from moving or drawing attention. I lay there in the cold, silent field, terrified and ashamed. "Jansen, what in the hell are you doing? You're about to get arrested for breaking the law." The lights got closer. Then they passed by. The truck drove off. Silence returned. The crisis was over. Dave stood up, calm as ever. I, on the other hand, was shaking. That night, I learned a lot. I learned how things worked in the North. I learned how desperate I could feel when trying to feed my family. And I learned how quickly the lines between right and wrong can blur when you're staring down a hungry household in a hard winter. It wasn't a proud moment, but it was a real one. Chapter 27, Emmaus Center. One of the proudest and most meaningful things I've ever done was join hands with my wife and partner, Trish Gaffney, to create the Emmaus Center. After her father, Bob, passed away, he left his children a generous inheritance. At first, we weren't sure how to use it, but after moving to Maryland, it became clear we were called to serve. Together, we invested that inheritance into launching a nonprofit, Emmaus Center, dedicated to feeding, clothing, and walking alongside people in need. From the start, our mission was simple: welcome everyone, serve with dignity, and offer love without conditions. We were open 6 days a week, providing both breakfast and lunch to anyone who walked through our doors. I arrived each morning at 6:30 a.m., and often those waiting outside would come in to help prepare the food. Coffee was brewed, Wawa sandwiches were microwaved, and the morning routine began together. Each morning at 8 a.m. we held morning prayer, followed by Holy Eucharist. Our table was open to everyone, no exceptions, no questions. That open table became the ministry. I still smile thinking about it. One of the most memorable moments came through a volunteer named Mohammed, a devout Muslim married to a Roman Catholic woman. He came faithfully to help and often joined us for morning prayer, but he never received communion, despite our regular invitation to all. Then, on one of his last days serving with us, Mohammed quietly stepped forward and received the body and blood of Christ. That moment touched me deeply, spiritually, emotionally. It reminded me of the sacred ground we stand on. We simply love one another. Tuesdays were clothing days. Trish and our volunteers would transform our pews into a seasonal clothing distribution area. People could browse, try things on, and take what they needed. No forms, no judgment, just compassion with dignity. Each weekday, I offer a half-hour Bible study before lunch. We set it for 11:30 a.m., and the timing worked perfectly. Whether people participated or just listened, the room was full, the conversations were meaningful. The word was shared in the midst of real life. Lunch followed, and then our team, still all volunteers, cleaned up the kitchen, wiped down tables, and closed by 2 p.m. We had a steam table to keep the food hot, and we made sure every detail met the needs of those we served. For 12 years, Emmaus Center became a place of hope, healing, and community. We didn't just provide meals and things. We listened to people's stories, held their pain, celebrated their victories, and helped them take the next step. Trish, a licensed clinical social worker, certified addiction counselor, and priest, used all her gifts in that space. I offered support from my own experience in recovery and as a board-certified pastoral counselor. Together, we met people where they were and offered what we could: faith, support, and love. When we eventually closed the doors of Emmaus Center, it broke our hearts. But as always, God remained faithful. Today, we continue the same work through Arundel House of Hope, still feeding, still loving, still showing up. The setting has changed, but the mission remains the same. Welcome all. Love well. Serve humbly. Chapter 28. Yes, I became a thief. There's a regret I still carry with me, one of those hard, humbling memories that never completely fades. It happened at the height of my alcoholism. I had been invited to a Christmas party in Gaylord, Michigan, hosted by the president of the local bank and his wife. It was a well-attended event filled with local business leaders and professionals. As was my habit back then, I made a stop at Mary's Tavern first. But unlike most nights, I didn't go home afterward. I went straight to the party. I remember walking into their home, tipsy but trying to appear composed. Just inside the door was a small 12-inch statue of a sailor dressed in foul-weather gear. It caught my eye. I remember thinking how impressive it looked. I greeted my hosts, made the rounds, and soon interest in the party. That's when I turned to scotch to liven things up. What happened after that is mostly a blur. At some point, I slipped on my trench coat and said my goodbyes. I don't recall leaving. Nothing about the rest of the evening stood out, just another night. But the next morning I woke up with the usual hangover, head pounding, stomach uneasy. I got up, dressed, and headed for the front closet to grab my coat. When I put it on, something felt off. It was heavier than usual. Reaching into my right pocket, I pulled out the object, explained the weight. It was the statue. The sailor in foul-weather gear. I froze. My heart sank as the truth hit me. I had stolen it. I stood there in disbelief, holding this man's property in my hands. A man who had welcomed me into his home. A man who had shown me nothing but respect, and I repaid him by violating his hospitality. I started asking myself the obvious questions. How did this happen? Or what were you thinking, Ed? Why would you do something so shameful? Were you trying to be funny? Were you even aware? I didn't have any answers. I just felt sick. There was no one to blame, no way to spin it. That morning was the moment my denial finally cracked. I could no longer pretend that my drinking was harmless. I was a drunk who had lost control, not just of my body, but of my character. I didn't take the statue to the office. I didn't leave it sitting around. I couldn't look at it without feeling waves of guilt and disgust. The shame was deep and real, but in hindsight, it was also necessary. Not long after, I went to an AA meeting and shared the story. I didn't hold back. It was raw, and it was honest. Afterward, a man who had become my sponsor came up to me, smiled, and said words I'll never forget. Ed, denial ain't just a river in Egypt. That was it. My denial was broken. My healing had begun. Chapter 29. My friend Phil. When I think back over the years, the truth is, I've had relatively few close friends. Why that is, I'm not entirely sure, but I have a strong suspicion it has something to do with one guy in particular, a charming Englishman named Richard, who worked for me back when I owned a travel business. Richard wasn't just any employee, he was my vice president, my right-hand man, my Cheerio mate, confidant. And then, just to spice things up, he embezzled hundreds of thousands of dollars and left me financially ruined. Cheers, Richard. Needless to say, after that betrayal, I wasn't exactly handing out friendship bracelets. But as life and healing often do, time helped me rebuild trust, along with a good 12-step program and a few laughs at my own expense. When Trish and I moved from Florida to Maryland and started the Emmaus Center, we met a man named Phil Bailey. No, not the singer from Earth, Wind, and Fire, but just as soulful. Phil was the co-founder of Arundel House of Hope, a local resource center for folks experiencing homelessness. From the moment we met, we knew we shared something special, a heart for service, a love for people, and a tendency to laugh inappropriately at things most people would whisper about. Phil had years of experience serving the homeless community and quickly became a trusted guide for us. But more than that, he became a friend. We started having lunch together once a week, and we've kept that tradition going for over 15 years. That's a lot of sandwiches, a lot of Cokes, and a lot of therapy we didn't have to pay for. We argue occasionally, mainly about who's the smartest or the best looking. But underneath the friendly jabs and exaggerated self-confidence is a deep appreciation for one another. Phil is the kind of friend who listens without fixing, laughs without judging, and offers wisdom without sounding like a Hallmark card. We talk about everything: faith, family, service, and the often hilarious indignities of aging. Our conversations bounce from theology to thermometers in under 5 minutes. We've built a friendship that's grounded in mutual respect, shared purpose, and the ability to laugh at life, even when life isn't laughing back. I thank God for Phil Bailey, not the chart-topping one, but the real one. He's been a gift, a mirror, a sounding board, and a fellow traveler. And I hope we have many more lunches, laughs, and debates ahead.
Especially the one where I convince him I'm the better looking one.
Chapter 30. Have I told her lately that I love her? My wife and partner, Trish Gaffney, came into my life in the most unexpected and grace-filled way. We first met online through a support group I joined to help me shed a few pounds and gain some accountability. Trish, a licensed clinical social worker, volunteered to be my sponsor. With her wisdom, kindness, and deep compassion, she guided me through those first 30 days. The program was structured so that a sponsor would offer support for 1 month, and then you were on your own. But something happened during those 30 days. Through our email exchanges, something more than support or advice began to take shape. A connection, quiet and undeniable, started to grow. I found myself looking forward to her messages each day. Her words weren't just helpful, they were grounding, full of encouragement, and somehow familiar, comforting. Still, on day 30, I followed the rules. I sent her a warm, grateful note, thanking her for all she had done for me, and gently said goodbye. Her reply? Huh? She didn't understand why our friendship had, and neither did I, if I'm honest. Reading her response, something inside me lifted. It felt like a door opening. I knew then I didn't want this to be over, not even close. Soon after, we began talking by phone, and before long we arranged to meet in person at Holy Spirit Monastery, a Trappist retreat center in Conyers, Georgia. The gathering was what's known as a silent retreat, where guests are encouraged to be still, to listen, to refrain from speaking. Let's just say we didn't exactly follow the silence rule. That weekend became the beginning of something sacred. We continued to talk daily and soon began visiting one another. She in Maryland, I in Florida. The more time we spent together, the more certain we became this wasn't just a connection, it was a calling. One evening during one of our regular conversations, I blurted out, "So, when are you moving to Florida?" And to my amazement and joy, she did. She left everything, her home, her practice, her familiar life in Maryland, and came to be with me in Florida. No one had ever loved me like that, fully, freely, without condition. Her decision wasn't just romantic, it was sacrificial, beautiful, and deeply humbling. Now, more than 21 years later, Trish continues to love me with the same open-hearted devotion, even with all my imperfections. And every day, I strive to love her with that same grace. She has made me feel like the most loved man in the world, and I hope, truly hope, she feels like the most loved woman, because she is.
Chapter 31.
Childhood fun. Some of the happiest moments of my childhood were the times I spent with my dad. Sure, Boy Scouts played a big part in that. He was our troop scoutmaster, but the connection between us ran deeper than uniforms and merit badges. He wasn't just respected by me, the entire troop admired him. He had that rare combination of toughness and tenderness, structure and humor. He held us accountable, yet he made us laugh. He expected a lot, but he always gave more in return. One moment stands out, both painful and, in hindsight, defining. I had injured my finger on the table saw in our basement woodshop. I came to him, bloodied and ashamed, and he looked at me, shook his head, and said with a wry grin, "If you're going to be stupid, you better be tough." Some might call that harsh, but I knew better. That was Dad's way of caring, always thinking ahead, always teaching. His humor wasn't to dismiss my pain, it was to help me remember the lesson and carry it with me. So much of who I became as a father came from him. I raised my two sons with the same steady love and a few of my own additions. I made sure they knew two things from early on. One, you're smart. Two, you're good looking. And you know what? They believed it. They grew up without the weight of doubt I sometimes carried, and I pray they never question their worth. My love for woodworking is another gift Dad passed down to me. I remember one Christmas season wandering into the basement to find him working at his bench. He was building something. What I soon realized was a model train track. I asked him what it was, and without missing a beat, he said, "I'm building a train track for Santa. Want to help me?" Me? Help Santa? That was all I needed to hear. That day, side by side with Dad, I worked on something magical. Even if some part of me suspected the gift might end up under our own tree, I still believed in the wonder of Santa, and more importantly, the time I was spending with my father. It felt like an honor, a privilege. As I got older, our bond only deepened. When Jan and I moved to northern Michigan, Mom and Dad followed. We started a tradition, Sunday dinners together, and it continued faithfully even after the move. Later, when they retired to Florida, I never imagined I'd find myself there too. But when my life fell apart and I needed to start over, that's exactly where I went. Back to them, back to him. I sat with him that morning as he lay unconscious in his hospital bed. His health had been declining, and he had made it clear he didn't want extraordinary measures taken. He had chosen a DNR order, but due to a mix-up at his assisted living facility, paramedics revived him anyway. When I arrived at the hospital, he looked at me, shook his head, and pointed to the breathing apparatus with pleading eyes. He didn't want it. He wanted peace. I told the nurse, "He's DNR." Watching them remove the mask wasn't easy. He was struggling to breathe, his eyes wide with fear. It felt like he was slipping away in panic. I rushed to get the nurse again, and they administered morphine. Slowly, his face softened. His breathing grew gentler, and I sat there, his son, watching the man who had taught me so much begin his final journey. I took his hand, leaned close, and whispered, It's okay, Dad. Sally and I will take care of Mom. You can let go now. And he did. Tears fell down my face, but my heart was full. In that moment, I realized the depth of love I carried for my imperfect, wonderful, fiercely loving father. How could I not consider those among the happiest moments of my childhood? To be that close, to love that deeply, to be loved that fully. How many people ever get to say that? I was blessed beyond words to call him my dad. Chapter 32. Going Through Complete Brokenness. The most challenging time in my life as a father came when I left Gaylord, broken, humiliated, and deeply aware of the mess my life had become. My world had collapsed under the weight of my choices, and while I had finally come to grips with my alcoholism and entered recovery, the consequences of my past hadn't magically disappeared. I had to make decisions. In the divorce settlement, I had signed over the promissory note from the sale of my travel business to Jan. Financially, it was worth more than what I would have owed in child support over the following years, and in that sense, I felt I had met a part of my responsibility. But money was only one piece of the puzzle. What about my boys? By then, I was painfully aware that I hadn't been the father they needed. I was too wrapped up in me, my ego, my business, my addictions. That's what addiction does. It turns your world inward and narrows your vision. Jan was working at a law firm and doing her best to keep things together, and I believed she'd be okay financially. But emotionally, the family was wounded. And I had played a big part in that. Before I moved to Florida, I sat down with David, my oldest. He was 17 at the time. I tried to have what I thought was a tough love conversation, telling him he might need to get a job. Looking back, I wish I had chosen different words of encouragement, reassurance, and pride. Instead, I gave him pressure. His face said everything. And though we've moved forward, I believe that conversation left a lasting mark in our relationship. For that, I'm truly sorry. Later, David married a wonderful woman, and together they've raised two beautiful children. I don't have the closeness I wish I did, but I remain proud of the man he became. Michael, our second son, had a different journey. After high school, he earned a full 4-year academic scholarship to the University of Michigan. I was so proud. He had grown into the brilliance I always told him he had. But then he called one day and told me he was switching majors to the School of Dance. Dance? I asked, confused. What happened, Mike? He said he'd realized how much he loved martial arts and thought dance might offer something similar. But I sensed something deeper was going on. Not long after that, he told me he was dropping out of college altogether and enlisting in the Marine Corps. I was stunned. I sent him a plane ticket to visit me in Florida. When he arrived, we had a wonderful time reconnecting. I think he could see that I truly loved him. He was searching for identity, for a purpose, and I was praying hard for wisdom. I didn't feel worthy to guide him, but I also couldn't abandon him. I had already done too much of that. One morning, we went for a walk along the beach. As we walked, a scuba diver emerged from the ocean. Now, being a diver myself, I knew it was unusual for someone to end a dive by walking ashore. So we waited and struck up a conversation. Within a minute, the diver told us he had just gotten out of the Marine Corps. I nearly cried. I asked him, what was it like? And without hesitation, he began describing how awful it had been for him. How brutal, how soul-draining. I looked at Mike. I didn't need to say a word. I told them I was heading home and left the two of them to talk. When Mike returned an hour later, he looked me in the eye and said, Dad, I don't think I'm going to join the Marines. I whispered a silent, thank you, Lord. That wasn't the end of Mike's journey. He later married a woman I wasn't sure would be the right partner for him. But life proved me wrong. Together, they raised 5 incredible children. I'm not as close to them as I'd like for a variety of reasons, but I love them deeply. And my great-granddaughter, Kyra, oh my God, what a beautiful soul. What a gift. Despite the pain, the missteps, and the broken chapters, I remain grateful for grace, the kind that shows up on beaches, in phone calls, in the eyes of our children, and in second chances. Chapter 33, Climbing the Ladder. Many of the dreams and aspirations I once chased have, over time, left me quietly humming that Peggy Lee song, Is That All There Is? The metaphor I often use to describe my pursuit of success is that of a man climbing a very tall ladder, leaning against the building labeled triumph and success. Step by step, I climbed, driven by ambition, effort, and the belief that once I reached the top, fulfillment would be waiting for me. But when I finally got there, I looked around and thought, is this it? Enough. I consider myself fortunate for having had that moment of disillusionment. Because the truth is, the chase, the never-ending quest for money, power, recognition, and control, is a mirage. I know, because I was there. I did it. I bought the t-shirt. And what I discovered is that success, as the world defines it, often leaves the soul empty. It's an insatiable appetite that never brings lasting joy or meaning. It's taken me nearly a lifetime, but I've come to understand something deeply true for me. Happiness and purpose aren't destinations. They're processes. They're movements, transformations, a gradual and grace-filled evolution that shifts us from me to we. As long as I was living for my joy, my success, my prosperity, nothing ever satisfied. There was always something missing, always the need for more. My addiction was a perfect example of that. The wisdom of recovery says, 1 is too much and 1,000 is never enough. That's the nature of the void. But when I started to believe and live as if we're all in this together, something inside me began to change. At first it was subtle. I noticed I felt myself. My relationships started to heal. People smiled at me, genuinely. I started smiling back. Eventually, I stopped climbing ladders altogether. I let go of the drive to rise above others and began finding peace in simply walking alongside them. I know. I no longer wanted to compete. I wanted to connect. I wanted to cooperate. I began to rejoice not only in my own small wins, but in the victories of others. And when I had the privilege of playing even a small role in someone else's success, I found a new kind of joy, a high, in fact, that felt cleaner, stronger, and more lasting than anything alcohol ever gave me. As I move closer to the later chapters of my life, that sense of connection only deepens. No, I haven't arrived, far from it. But I find myself becoming more open, more loving, the sacred thread that ties all things together. I feel it in my relationships. I feel it in the forest, in the wind. I feel it with our pets, and strangely enough, in my growing discomfort with eating meat. I've even caught myself talking to the birds outside our window. I remember a moment at a Emmaus Center after Trish and I had moved into our final location. A man named Steve had volunteered to help us remodel the space. One day, I saw him gently pick up a cockroach and carry it outside. A cockroach. Most people wouldn't think twice before stepping on it, but Steve didn't. He saw it as a life, something sacred, connected. Now, I can't promise you I'd do the same thing if I saw one today, but I remember that moment and I carry it with me because Steve reminded me in that quiet act of kindness of something I believe with all my heart. We are all connected, all of us. Whether we recognize it or not, we are in this together. Chapter 34. Up north is still in my heart. One place that still stands out in my memory is the cedar swamps of Wilderness Valley in Gaylord, Michigan. It's a story I love to tell, equal parts funny and nostalgic. filled with the joy of a time when our lives were immersed in nature and togetherness. After moving from Vanderbilt, Jan and I, along with our two boys, David and Michael, settled into Gaylord. I had taken a job with Dale Smith, a friend of my dad's, who owned ski and shore real estate. Around the same time, my parents bought a beautiful chalet tucked into a wooded development known as Wilderness Valley, where every lot was 10 acres of peace and pine, thus the name. Not long after, a log cabin chalet nearby came up for sale, and Jan and I jumped at the chance. It was a mile from Mom and Dad, and it felt like our own private world, and it truly was our dream home. Surrounded entirely by trees, with no neighbors in sight, it was serene and still. Our quarter-mile driveway wound through the woods and required a plow truck in winter, which, of course, I was happy to buy. David and Michael loved it there. Each had his own cozy bedroom downstairs, while Jan and I enjoyed a spacious master suite upstairs. Our detached 2.5-car garage housed our vehicles, snowmobiles, and more than a few dreams. Wildlife visited us regularly, especially deer, which fascinated me and seemed like the perfect gateway for teaching the boys about nature. One day at work, a colleague mentioned a local farmer who was trying to unload a large supply of second cutting alfalfa hay. He was selling it cheap. A plan began to form. I visited the farmer, bought a full load, and, without much thought, stacked it all in our garage. My idea? We'd feed the deer through the winter, using the hay as a regular offering down in the cedar swamp nearby. A perfect plan, right? Well, almost. That evening, Jan pulled into the driveway, pressed the garage door opener, and was met not by her parking spot, but by a wall of hay. She stepped inside the house and, with that unmistakable tone, said, "Ed?" I explained that the snow would ruin the hay if we stored it outside. She calmly replied, "What about the snow we'll get on our cars?" God love her. To this day, I'm not sure why she put up with me, but she did with grace. That winter, the deer feeding mission began. After supper, I'd fire up the snowmobile, sled loaded with hay, and call for Dave and Mike to hop on. We'd head down into the swamp, cold, dark, and magical. The first time, the roar of the snowmobile sent the deer scattering into the trees. We dropped the hay and headed home. A few days later, we returned, and to our delight, the hay was gone. We left more. And this time, as we departed, we saw deer lingering nearby, watching us. It was as if they'd learned the routine. By the end of winter, they didn't run from the sound of the snowmobile. They came toward it, waiting, trusting. It was beautiful to witness. Even Jan came around, forgiving me for sacrificing her garage spot. And David and Michael, they fell deeper in love with the outdoors. The following year, we all took up cross-country skiing together, another way to share the woods, the stillness, and each other. Looking back now, those snowy nights in the cedar swamp, just about hay and deer, they were about connection between a father and his sons, between a family and the land, and even between a man and a very patient wife. It was one of those seasons that stays with you, a chapter of life full of simple joy and quiet wonder. Chapter 35. Would I change my past? I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I've hurt people, sometimes deeply, because of my own selfishness, fear, or insecurity. And for those I've harmed, yes. If I could go back and change the pain I caused them, I would, without hesitation. I'd rewrite their past to remove the burden of my wrong choices from their lives. But if you're asking whether I would change my past for me, the answer is no. Despite the regrets, despite the wounds and stumbles along the way, I find myself today filled with deep gratitude for the journey that brought me here. I'm at the later stages of life now. My health isn't what it once was, and my energy is limited, There are things I used to do with ease that I simply can't anymore, and yet I am at peace. If I could change anything, have the energy of my youth, limitless wealth, the ability to travel the world, I honestly believe I'd still choose to be right here doing exactly what I'm doing now. There's nowhere I'd rather be than serving others, living simply, loving Trish, and sharing whatever wisdom I picked up along the way. Well, there is one thing I'd like to change. I wish I could do more to help Trish with the daily tasks I used to handle. She carries a lot, and while she seems content and continues to serve with such grace, both as a therapist and as a priest, I hope one day she'll let me convince her to bring in a little extra help. But even now, she remains a strong, loving, and deeply compassionate partner. I admire her more than words can say. So would I change anything? My answer is no. I wouldn't change a thing. And when I make that statement, do I have any idea how many people in my world are not able to say that? I am blessed in spite of my brokenness. I have been given far more than I deserve. Chapter 36. Growing Old Ain't for Sissies. When I turned 70, I began to notice the slow and steady decline in my health. Someone once joked, if I knew I was going to live this long, I would have taken better care of myself. I get it now. For the past 25 years, I've actually done my best to take better care of myself. But as life often reminds us, there are consequences to the choices we make, especially the ones I made in the first 50 years. And so, here I am, living with a condition that took nearly a decade for doctors to name, cerebellar ataxia. Even now, while the medical field has labeled it, I still suspect many doctors are thinking, we'll call it this. But truthfully, we don't know what's really going on. And we sure don't know how to treat it effectively. As much as I respect and appreciate the medical profession, I've also grown critical of our healthcare system in our country today. It often feels like there's more profit in treating sickness than in finding a cure. And that to me feels like a broken system. Still, I focus on what I can do. Physically, I'm not who I used to be. There are limits now, boundaries I didn't have to think about before. But mentally, my mind continues to surprise me. I find myself filled with new thoughts, fresh insights, unexpected moments of clarity. But when it comes to reflecting on life, meaning, and purpose, I feel wide awake. My dad used to say, too soon old, too late smart. Maybe there's truth in that. But even if the wisdom's arriving late, I'm just grateful it's arriving at all. And here's the thing. The insights I'm having now may not be new to the world, but they're new to me. And in this season of life, that's more than enough. Chapter 37. 3 words. The 3 things I'd like to describe my life would be: 1, he was teachable. 2, he practiced humility. 3, he tried to love unconditionally. Chapter 38, Remember Me. I'd like people to remember by saying, Ed made me feel good about myself. Chapter 39. Hey kids, keep up the good work. I have great hope for the next generation because they are our future. What saddens me, though, is when I hear people romanticize their own past with phrases like, back in my day, as if their generation was somehow superior to the one growing up now. I often want to gently remind them, the generation before yours thought the same thing about you. The truth is, the world is always changing. Each generation faces new challenges shaped by its own time. When I was a kid, one of the biggest concerns I had was getting caught chewing gum in class. Today, children are wearing bulletproof backpacks. That's a heartbreaking reflection of how the world has shifted. Back then, we relied on a full set of encyclopedias that took up an entire shelf in the living room. Now, with just a phone in their hands, kids have access to more information than most of us could have imagined. And that access has made many of them more informed, more curious, and, in many cases, more compassionate. Is this generation perfect? Of course not. Are there things they could rethink or do better? Absolutely. But I can say with confidence, many young people today are more inclusive, open-hearted, and accepting than any generation before them. They don't judge people as quickly based on race, gender identity, religion, disability, or who they love. They've grown up in a world where diversity is not feared, but embraced. And because they have access to more knowledge and perspectives, they're not as easily misled by narrow thinking. They've learned how to think critically. In my generation, we were taught that being left-handed was a defect. We seriously believed it was something that needed to be corrected. Today's kids hear that and laugh. And honestly, we should too. So maybe it's time we step down from our high horses and stop looking back through rose-colored glasses. Instead, let's lift up the next generation. Let's encourage them to continue walking the path of empathy, equity, and inclusion. The world becomes a better place when we love each other the way God has loved us, not in spite of our differences, but because of them. Being different isn't a flaw, it's a gift. And the future is in good hands. Chapter 40, Thankful. There have been many people who have left a mark on my life. Mentors, teachers, friends, family members, all of whom, in their own ways, helped shape the person I am today. But among them all, one person stands out above the rest. One soul, one steady presence, has not only influenced me, but transformed me in ways I never thought possible. That person is Trish Gaffney, my wife, my partner, my best friend. We've been walking through life together for over 20 years now. And during that time, she has challenged me, encouraged me, comforted me, and helped me grow. But what's most remarkable is that she has done all of this without ever making me feel small, foolish, or wrong. Even when, let's be honest, I probably was one or more of those things. There's a grace in the way Trish sees people, and I've been blessed to be on the receiving end of it for more than 2 decades. Trish is a licensed clinical social worker and has spent most of her professional life in the field of mental health, guiding others through their pain, confusion, growth, and healing. People come to her seeking clarity, and more often than not, they with something far greater than they expected, a sense of hope. In all my life, I have never met someone so relentlessly curious about the human spirit. She doesn't just ask questions, she listens. She doesn't just diagnose, she discerns. And even more than her brilliance, it's her humility that stands out. Is she perfect? No. She'll be the first to say so. She makes mistakes like we all do. But unlike many of us, she's quick to own them. There's never blame shifting, no defensiveness. Just honesty, compassion, and a quiet will to learn. One of the things Trish told me early in our relationship has stayed with me ever since. She said, in therapy, my goal isn't to fix people by hammering away at their weaknesses. It's to help them discover and build on their strengths. That perspective alone turned so much of what I thought I knew about growth and healing on its head. I'd spent a good portion of my life focusing on what was wrong with me or others, but Trish taught me to see people, including myself, through a much kinder lens. Now, let's talk about disagreements. Every relationship has them, of course. But with Trish, arguments don't play out the way I was used to. I came in prepared to defend my position, to make my case, to win the day. But Trish, she has a disarming strategy, one that continues to throw me off balance in the most beautiful way. She doesn't fight back to prove a point. She listens. Then, with remarkable calm, she says something like, "You're right, I didn't handle that well, or that part was on me." Just like that, the wind leaves my sails. No more fire, no more need to win. And you know what happens then? I find myself defending her. I find myself saying, no, it wasn't all you. I could have handled it better too. It's incredible what happens when two people stop fighting to be right and start trying to understand each other instead. That's Trish's way, not just in our relationship, but with everyone she meets. She lives out what I would call a sacred patience. She invites dialogue rather than demands agreement. She honors the complexity of people, of emotions, of relationships. And in doing so, she makes you want to be a better person, not because she asks you to change, but because she helps you see the better version of yourself already within you. Trish has taught me that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it shows up in silence, in listening, in the courage to own your flaws, and the tenderness to love someone through theirs. She has changed me, not with grand speeches or dramatic ultimatums, but with her presence, her character, her consistent kindness. And for that, I am forever grateful. Chapter 41, From Emmaus Center to Together with Hope. In March of 2020, we were in the beginning of the COVID pandemic. The vaccination for this virus had not yet been introduced to the world. The all-volunteer homeless resource center Trish and I founded was thriving. We were serving up to 2,500 meals each month to whomever walked in our doors, no questions asked, and all were welcome. I opened the center at 6:30 each morning. People would come hungry, in need of food, clothing, acceptance, a listening ear, and friends who wouldn't judge them. By the grace of God, we were able to do that for 12 years. After breakfast, we had morning prayer and communion, where everyone was invited to participate and receive the Holy Sacrament. But things were changing. The world was uncertain about this disease. People were dying, and misinformation began to circulate throughout our country. Trish and I discussed how we should respond. We certainly did not want to be a breeding ground where people got sick and even died. No, so we decided to limit people's access to our center. We decided to give people a takeout breakfast and lunch. Mike even bought us containers to fill for our friends who came to join us. From 2,500 meals a month, we had 2 people show up for takeout the first day. We were shocked. In all these years, we truly believed that people came to us for the free meals. 2 people! Then the realization hit us. Unbeknownst to us, we had created a community of people who loved gathering together. Not a bunch of homeless people looking for a free ride. Due to my personal health concerns and the uncertainty of how we were going to survive financially, we decided to close the center. It was one of the most unhappy moments of our lives. As things began to settle and the threat of sickness and death began to diminish within the world, we found ourselves longing for that connection to God through the friends we made at Emmaus Center. Oh, we really tried to go back to our old way of serving God. We joined a church that seemed to be loving and sincere, but it wasn't making it. Then Phil Bailey and I were talking over lunch, and he suggested that I get a hold of Mario at Arundel House of Hope. As we pursued volunteering for them, a wonderful friend told us she wanted to join us in this endeavor. She had worked for AHO and was very familiar with the way they operated. On top of that, Emmaus Center had enjoyed a good relationship with them as we supported their winter relief program. Well, it all turned out wonderful. Yvette joined us and Mario approved of us volunteering. Over the next 3 years, Yvette Robinson Norman invited John Kaufman to join us. So there were 4 of us. Each one of us brought our volunteer group a very special gift, all of which are being used today to serve our friends. Trish, being a therapist, is able to meet people one-on-one and not only listen to them share their troubles, but to offer loving professional help. As a priest and recovering alcoholic, I am able to relate to our friends dealing with addiction. John, one who had experienced homeless himself, is able to connect with people like no else at together. So, we make up a team. Each one has contributed to the work we do as an organization. I have sometimes thought about what my retirement would look like today if I could choose to do anything else. And the truth, if I could do anything I wanted to do, I wouldn't choose anything else. Chapter 42. Grateful, helpful, hopeful. As I bring this memoir to a close, there is one word that rises above all others in my heart: grateful. Truly, deeply, soulfully grateful. This process of putting my life into words, of revisiting the joys, the heartbreaks, the transformations, the failures, and the moments of grace, has given me something I never expected: peace. Writing these reflections has been more than an exercise in storytelling. It has been a spiritual reckoning, a gentle unwinding of years, and a way for me to hold my life in both hands and say, yes, this was good. I've lived an extraordinary life, not because of riches or power or accolades, but because of the people I've known, the lessons I've learned, the pain I've endured, and the love I've received and given. Mine has been a life filled with contradictions, surprises, and second chances. And now, as I near the end of this journey, I find myself not wanting more, but simply wanting to make more of what remains. I am grateful that I do not feel restless for what I've missed. I am not haunted by the pursuit of what's next. Instead, I am content. Content in a way that I never imagined I'd be, especially in my younger, more ambitious, and sometimes more self-centered days. Whatever time the good Lord grants me now, I want to spend it in service, to love, to give, to show up for others, especially for those who are often forgotten or pushed aside. And that brings me to the second word in my heart: helpful. I want to be helpful, not in a grand, world-changing way, but in the quiet, steady way that brings warmth and encouragement to others. I want my wife to feel supported and cherished. I want my family to know how deeply they've been loved. I want my friends to remember me as someone who made them laugh, who listened with care, who offered perspective without judgment. I want to use whatever remaining gifts God has entrusted to me, whether it's wisdom, humor, compassion, or simply presence, to lift others up. It's important to me that people feel seen, that they feel worthy. If someone walks away from an encounter with me and thinks he made me feel good about myself, then I've done something meaningful with my life. And finally, hopeful. Hopeful that these reflections, these memories, these little stories I've shared throughout this memoir might offer something of value to you, the reader. Whether it's comfort, clarity, laughter, or a nudge toward healing, if this writing serves you in any way, then it has served its purpose. I have made many mistakes in my life, some small, others far more painful. But I've come to believe that our mistakes do not disqualify us from being people of worth or wisdom. On the contrary, our mistakes, when acknowledged, reflected upon, and transformed, can become the very soil in which grace grows. I hope that by being honest about mine, others might avoid some of the same pitfalls, and if not, I hope they at least feel less alone in their struggles. In the end, what I wish most for the world and for you is simple. Let's love one another, not with idealized love, not with perfect love, but with real love, the kind that sees each other's wounds and stays close anyway, the kind that forgives, the kind that listens, the kind that recognizes that we are all in some way broken and all in some way beautiful. Let's stop fearing our differences and start celebrating them. Our diversity of thought, of identity, of experience is not a threat. It is a gift. A rich, sacred gift that teaches us how to expand our understanding, our empathy, our humanity. Sometimes we think we've figured life out until we meet someone who sees the world differently. And in that moment, we have a choice: to reject them or to learn from them. I hope we choose to learn, because in learning, we grow. And in growing, we become better people. And maybe that's what this whole life thing is about after all. Thank you for sharing this journey with me. May your days be full of grace, your mistakes full of lessons, and your heart full of love. We are all in this together. With love and gratitude,